Gonzaga roster sure has a lot of similarities to that 2016-17 team that broke through and took the Zags to the national championship. Could history be repeating itself here in 2024?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, folks, right now. New customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. We got a lot to cover today. Drew Timme had a monster game in the G League, and Mark Few had some thoughts about that. A former Gonzaga baseball star got traded twice in 1 week. We're going to take a look at the Zags in the NBA, how they're doing. But first, this is a question I've gotten a handful of times in Mailbag. Those of you who listen to Mailbag Monday Mailbag Monday episodes, have probably heard me talk about this a little bit, but the comparisons for this year's current Gonzaga roster and that 2016-17 team that went to the national championship the first time Gonzaga officially crossed that threshold, there are a lot of similarities. I want to kind of lay it out, talk about it, look at some KenPom numbers, and kind of figure out if this team is on the right path, the right trajectory to potentially break through yet again, and kind of what that might look like. We're going to do a big preview of the Washington game coming up on Friday's episode will be all about that game that is happening on Saturday. So if you're looking for some keys to victory against UW, what that might look like, trust me, we will get to that on Friday. But for right now, I want to talk about this. Throw it back 7 years. Talk about the 16-17 team. For those of you who are newer Gonzaga fans, maybe don't remember that year as well. That team was undefeated until senior night. They lost to BYU in the McCarthy Athletic Center. Shout out BYU for breaking that streak and being the team to end Gonzaga's undefeated season up to that point. Gonzaga then used that momentum. I remember speaking with Jeremy Jones on an old episode of the Locked On Zags podcast about what they did after that BYU game. They kind of gathered together, had a players-only meeting, and kind of figured out what do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen to us again. Ran through the WCC tournament, got a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, and continued to dominate, went to the first time ever making it to that Final Four, beat South Carolina on an incredibly close, tightly contested game right there. The Gamecocks under Frank Martin, fantastic program, kind of gets lost in history. That team was really good. Sindarius Thornwell was incredible. Killian Tillie, as a true freshman, buried a pair of free throws when Gonzaga was up 2 with just a few seconds to go. He had 2 free throws, gave them a 4-point lead, ended up securing the victory there. Gonzaga goes in to that national championship after playing South Carolina to then play North Carolina. The Tar Heels, of course, ultimately win that game. Gonzaga was leading for huge chunks of the game, leading with about 6 minutes to go. Kennedy Meeks was out of bounds. We all know the dang story there for Gonzaga losing that game. But I want to talk about how this team is similar here for Gonzaga. And the main thing, it starts with roster construction. The roster construction is really similar. It would be basically identical had Steele Venters not suffered his preseason injury. We'll start with the bigs. Four big lineup, 4 big rotation for both of these teams. It's kind of, Gonzaga hasn't run 4 bigs a lot in recent years. We saw them kind of go away from it last year. Efton Reed was that 4th big, but he wasn't really in the rotation. We've seen that in previous years as well. But back in 16-17, it was truly 4 bigs for both teams. We'll just kind of go one by one. Graham Ike is kind of like the Przemek Karnowski of this team. He's the experienced big, the anchor down low defensively, high usage rate offensively, lots of touches. Anton Watson's the Johnathan Williams. Defensive focused player, can be the go-to scorer if you need him to be, a good complementary piece in that starting lineup, a good complementary piece in the front court. Isn't going to get the same number of touches as EK, but still can step out, space the floor a little bit. Kind of similarities between those two guys there. And then we'll stick with the starting lineup here. Dusty Stromer is like Silas Melson, young player, big role. I think Melson played 21, 22 minutes per game, do a little bit of everything, good defensively, good offensively, can hit the three. I've heard Stromer get compared to Joel Ayayi, and I know that Joel was kind of compared to Silas Melson a little bit earlier in their career, so I think you can see the similarities there. Now, Melson did not start for that 2016-17 team. He came off the bench and played 20 minutes. That's what Gonzaga wanted Dusty Stromer to be. That was the vision. That was the goal. But unfortunately, Gonzaga's 2023-24 version of Jordan Matthews, who was, of course, the starting three for Gonzaga in that 16-17 team, that was Steele Venters, and he's out for the year. And the similarities, you can see the similarities there. Transfers coming in, filling a role as an outside shooter, not necessarily asked to do a whole lot other than that. I think Matthews is probably a better, more impactful defensive player than Venters would have been, but we never really got to see that, because, of course, Steele gets hurt before the season starts. So Stromer is like Silas Melson. They're just being asked to play different roles because Gonzaga does not have their Jordan Matthews for this year. Then you get to the guards. Nolan Hickman is Josh Perkins. And honestly, this comp works really well. Perkins was the starting point guard who then in this season took on a role as a two guard, shifted over to play off the ball, and we saw some efficiency numbers tick up. We saw his production increase. We saw the fan base kind of change their tune about Josh Perkins after he was playing off the ball. There was a lot of criticism of his performance on the ball. When he moves into that role, he shines in a bigger way. All of that is true of Nolan Hickman. It is exactly what we have seen from him so far. And the reason that Hickman and Perkins moved off the ball is because of a transfer guard coming in and immediately taking over lead guard duties. In 17, that was Nigel Williams-Goss coming over from Washington. He, of course, sat out the previous year, so he had been familiar with the Gonzaga system. For this year's team, it's Ryan Nembhard. He did not have to sit out, but he was pretty familiar with Gonzaga's system, in part because it's not too dissimilar from what they run at Creighton, and also because he is the younger brother of Andrew Nembhard, who, of course, himself was a very successful part of a two-point guard lineup for Gonzaga in that 21 season with Jalen Suggs. So you look at this comparison here, two starting point guards, one who was the lead guard who shifted to an off-ball role, one who transferred into play. You look at the bigs and Ike and Watson and their comparison to Karnowski and Williams. You see Stromer and Melson filling a similar role, albeit an adjustment having to be made because of an injury for Steele Venters. And then you look at the bench and you can see continued similarities here. Braden Huff is Zach Collins. Freshman big. Obviously, Collins was a true freshman, not a redshirt, but regardless, freshman big who is immediately impactful off the bench, immediately comes in, contributes right away, floor spacer, decent defensive player, good touch around the rim, lots of comparisons there. And we've been comparing Ben Gregg and Killian Tillie for about 3 years now for good reason. Floor spacing bigs, high energy guys, impactful on the defensive end, just kind of bring it every single night. And the comparisons there are obvious. I mean, Braden Huff and Zach Collins is a pretty obvious comparison to make at this point with the way that they have played. Collins is more of a rim protector than Huff, although Huff has been fine in that area. That Zach was very, very good at that, but the comparisons are very similar. And even then you go further down, Luka Krajinovic and Brian Alberts. Alberts played 20-something games, about 4 or 5 minutes per night. We'll see if Krajinovic gets up to that or if he is even further down on the depth chart than that. But again, a guard who's kind of asked to play a bit role, mostly in garbage time type situation. And then you have Jun-Suk Yeo and Rui Hachimura. Of course, Rui bring hell-raising energy, a ton of athleticism, didn't seem to know what he was supposed to be doing, what he was asked to do. Rui played less in that 16-17 season than June is playing this year, in part because of necessity, again, because of the injury. If Jordan Matthews had missed the entire year for Gonzaga, we would have seen Silas Melson start. We would have seen more minutes likely from Rui and or Alberts, similar to how we're potentially seeing more minutes from Krajinovic, although we haven't yet with him, and certainly seeing more minutes for Yo. So ideally, the development that Rui went on the next couple of years is at least going to be somewhat similar to the development we see from Yo, because that would be a really nice benefit for Gonzaga in a year or so. Beyond that, stylistically, these teams are similar. Currently, right now, through the first month of the college basketball season, Gonzaga is 8th offensively at KenPom. They are 19th defensively. Tempo, they are 80th. In that 2016-17 season, at the end of the year, they finished 16th offensively, 1st defensively, and 76th in tempo. Really, really, really similar. Basically flip the offense and defense. That is the big difference. Obviously, Gonzaga was first in defense as opposed to being 19th in defense here and then 8th in offense this year, where they were only 16th in that season, but still tons of similarities, similar tempo, similarly productive offensively and defensively, similar roster construction with the 4 bigs, the 2 point guards. You can see the vision. You can see the goal. You can see why Mark Few constructed the roster the way they did, especially when you look at the steel venters of it all and where he would have fit in and how that makes this even more similar to that 2016-17 team. Can Gonzaga reach that threshold? Of course. Of course they can. They have a lot of work to do. The depth is not as good. We know part of the reason why, but it's just not. It's just not as good as it was on that team. But it could get better. It will get better. This team still has big tests left. They got UConn in just under 2 weeks. They have San Diego State at the end of the month. They have Washington in a couple of days. Washington's going to be a potential quad 1 game for Gonzaga. They are a good team this year, so that's a nice game for them as well. WCC is a little weaker. We know that, but Gonzaga still got plenty of tests. They got Kentucky in February. Gonzaga needed that loss to BYU to kind of jumpstart them in that 16-17 season. There's no team quite as good as that BYU team in the WCC this year, but Kentucky in February might be the kick that Gonzaga needs to get themselves into gear as they get into March. This kind of comparison makes me even more excited about where this Gonzaga team is at right now, and should kind of be something that people who watched that team closely back then are able to see when watching this team so far this year. But we are about 20 games into the NBA season, and Chet Holmgren, folks, he's the favorite to win the Rookie of the Year, and he totally should be. Domantas Sabonis also looks like he's going to be an all-star yet again. Jalen Suggs is having the best year of his career. We're going to talk about all that and more after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, score early and score often this college basketball season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is really easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, which include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Right now, the Zags currently have 1,000-to-1 odds to make the Final Four. And if you're feeling like, hey, this team does look a lot like that 16-17 team, I think they are going to be dancing in that Final Four. You drop $20, you could be $200 richer and super happy in late March. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to kick off the college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball. For those of you who listen, your first listen and your first watches of the day. We got Discord channels for both Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball. You can find the links in the show notes there. Definitely check it out if you have not done so yet. Free to you. We're talking college hoops 24/7. But for right now, we're going to switch over and talk about the NBA. We're going to talk about the Zags in the NBA. We're about 20 games in to the NBA season as we round up that in-season tournament, which has been going on for the last couple of weeks in the NBA. I want to give just a kind of a quick rundown of how each of the Zags have been doing up to this point. We'll find more times later in the year to kind of break down individual performances. But for right now, we're just doing a quick wraparound. Chet Holmgren. And many of these stats are going to be a little bit out of date as I'm recording this before a lot of the Wednesday evening games, including the Thunder, who are playing the Rockets on Wednesday. Right now, Chet is averaging 17.6 points, 8 boards, 2.6 assists, 2.2 blocks, shooting about 40% from three, a little over 60% on twos. And he's the front runner for Rookie of the Year. He has surpassed French phenom Victor Wembanyama, in the race for Rookie of the Year. And for good reason. He has looked phenomenal. This Oklahoma City team is really, really dangerous with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, with Jalen Williams. This is a fantastic team, and Chet has looked every bit the part that we knew he was capable of being. It's been fantastic to see him finally put that skill on display for everybody to see in the NBA. Julian Strawther also in his rookie season in the NBA. The Nuggets are playing the Clippers on Wednesday, but prior to that game, Strawther, through his first 18 NBA games, playing about 12.5 minutes per night, averaging about 5 points, a board, and a steal. He's only shooting 32% from three. He's had some big flashy games, he's had a 20-point performance already in the NBA. And again, the Nuggets are so good at identifying college wings and getting talent that way, using late first-round picks on Christian Braun, on Peyton Watson, now on Julian Strawther. Their ability to find wings when that's a desperately seeked position in the NBA. Denver's fantastic at it. Strother, I think, is going to have a very lucrative and successful career in Denver based on his first 20 games in the NBA. Andrew Nembhard in his second NBA season. His minutes have dipped a bit from last year. He's not starting anymore. They brought in Bruce Brown, who's kind of shifted Tyrese Halliburton to the point guard position for the Pacers. Nembhard's still being very productive, though, about 7 points, a little over 4 assists per game. The three-point percentage has dipped. I think that's a little bit of early season wonkiness for him. He's about 24%. I suspect that'll come back up over into that 32, 35 range for him, which should bump the overall production. Still having a really nice season, especially for a second-round pick to be a productive member of the team in his second season after having an all-rookie caliber season in year one. Jalen Suggs, best season of his career so far. Unquestionably, he is healthy. He is confident. He is killing it right now for the Orlando Magic. Through 19 games, we're missing his game against Cleveland. 27 minutes per game. He's averaging 13 points, 3.6 boards, 2.7 assists, and 1.9 steals. He's shooting 37% from three. Folks, in his first 2 years, he was barely over 25. He was really struggling in those first 2 years. Now he's shooting 37% from three, 52.5% on two-pointers, a little over 81% from the free throw line. Career high in every single number except for assists because he's playing more off the ball. Really nice to see what we've seen from Jalen so far. A couple more guys to get to as we got a lot of Zags playing in the NBA. Corey Kispert. Again, Washington's playing the 76ers this evening. Before that game, Corey threw his first 18 games, about 23 minutes per game, 11 points, 2.5 boards, and 1.5 assists. He's shooting 37% from three. Pretty similar numbers to last year, basically in every way. He's right around the same metrics, but he's playing about 5 minutes less per game. So it's good to see his numbers, his efficiency tick up, his production stay the same despite less minutes. Frankly, I'd love to see Corey on a different team. Washington is just kind of a mess right now. They don't have true point guard play. They're struggling to kind of fill out the roster the way they want to. They don't seem to have much direction going forward. Corey strikes me as a player who, he'd probably play less minutes somewhere else, but could be a really, really impactful bench piece, a three-point shooter coming off the bench, playing a valuable role for a playoff contender. And I hope Washington is able to potentially maybe move him, get some assets back for the future, and allow Corey to be in a spot where he can compete for an NBA championship. Kind of like what happened with Rui Hachimura. Perfect transition here for Rui, who, of course, got traded to the Los Angeles Lakers last year from the Washington Wizards. Rui was a huge part of LA's playoff run last year. I think he was the first player since Magic Johnson to lead the Lakers in scoring or score 20 points off the bench for the Lakers in 2 games in a playoff series. He hasn't quite been that productive so far this regular season for Los Angeles. In 13 games, he was dealing with some injuries. He's played about 23 minutes per game, 11.5 points, a little under 4 boards. He is shooting 41% from three, though. I know that a big part of why the Lakers wanted Rui was his ability to hit corner threes. That's an area that LeBron loves to pass the ball out to the corner and get some guys some open looks there, and Rui has really capitalized on that. A couple more guys, 3 more guys to talk about here. Zach Collins, another guy having a fantastic year. He's having he's got a career high in points, career high in assists, career high in steals, career high in 2-point field goal percentage. All of that fantastic stuff, 13.8 points, 6 boards, 4 assists, little under a steal per game. He is shooting 63% on 2-pointers. He's been able to adjust really well to having Victor Wembanyama as his teammate in the front court. Only shooting 27% on threes. I suspect that will change as the season gets going, but really nice to see the production we've seen from him thus far. And then you got the All-Star, Domantas Sabonis, All-NBA, All-Star, one of the best players in the league, and he looks every bit that same exact guy so far this season through 19 games with the Kings. 19 points, 12 boards, 7 assists, 1 steal per game. He's shooting a career-high 40% from three. Still not a huge volume, but you don't really want Domantas Sabonis taking a bunch of threes. That's not the way that Sacramento's offense is set up, but the fact that he is knocking them down at a higher clip just forces defenses to have to guard him a little bit differently. Really nice stuff from him. He is well on his way to another All-Star game appearance in Sacramento. Last but not least, Kelly Olynyk, the veteran, the old head, the OG of the group here in the NBA. Kelly is with the Utah Jazz. They're playing the Mavericks on Wednesday, although Kelly will not participate in that game. 19 games for him so far this year. He's only playing about 21 minutes per game, 7.6 points, 5.5 boards, and 3.7 assists. It's a career low in points, for Kelly. His career low previously was 8.2 points as a rookie. He's averaging 7.6 this year, but it is a career high in assists at 3.7 for him. The ratios are the best they've ever been. 2-point percentage is about 65. 3-point percentage, again, 47. It's about 88% from the free throw line. So we're seeing him play a little bit less minutes, score a little bit fewer points, but put up higher efficiency numbers. I think that's a totally logical transition for Kelly as he gets into the tail end of what has been an incredibly prolific NBA career for the Olynyk Clinic. Brandon Clark, the only other Zag in the NBA, he remains out with an Achilles injury and is potentially not going to play at all this year for the Memphis Grizzlies, certainly not anytime super soon. But we're going to stick with our pro Zags trend here. We're going to talk about Drew Timme's 30-point game in the G League for the Wisconsin Herd. We're going to talk about Mark Few's quotes about that contest, a few other updates from the G League and the MLB, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Prize Picks. Folks, Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead you to big payouts, like their Taco Tuesday deal. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide you with even more value. Plus, with the Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for NFL games or college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. This is unprecedented in the daily fantasy sports space. Prize Picks is the only DSF platform with injury insurance. And beyond that, this app is just really easy to use. All you have to do is pick 2 or more players, and you choose more or less with whatever the given stat is. So for Thursday Night Football, Ezekiel Elliott is going to be the lead running back for the New England Patriots. They are projecting him at 61.5 rushing yards. I think he's going to hit over that. I would be hitting over there, the more button there. So you can go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Join me with that on Elliott. Use that promo code LockedOnCollege as well, and you will get a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use promo code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, folks, rounding out the show today, discussing Zags in the G League, as well as Marco Gonzalez, former Gonzaga pitcher, and what the current situation is with him after getting traded twice in the same week. We're going to lead with Drew Timme, though, because Drew Timme had a monster game for the Wisconsin Herd. Again, that is the G League affiliate of the Milwaukee Bucks. He signed with Milwaukee after going undrafted in the NBA draft. He has been with Milwaukee ever since, ended up assigned to their G League affiliate in Wisconsin. And he had 30 points, 10 boards, and 6 assists in Wisconsin's most recent game. And fun fact, Mark Few, after the game against Arkansas Pine Bluff on Tuesday, a reporter was able to ask Mark Few, or tell Mark Few effectively, that Drew had this 30-point, 10 rebound, 6 assist game, and kind of asked for his response to it and his overall feelings about Drew Timme. Mark Few's direct quote here, I'm reading this, I pulled this from a tweet from Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review. It says, quote, "I think he's an NBA player. I think they'll eventually figure it out. He's just too good of a basketball player, and he's too good of a guy, too good of a teammate to not have on a roster. I tell everybody that." And Few went on to say that effectively he talks about Drew Timme when he's at Team USA practices over the summer, when he's talking to Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra. I just love the idea of Mark Few effectively spreading the good word of Drew Timme, trying to convince folks that he does deserve to be in that spot. And certainly he's played like an NBA player. Obviously, Drew Timme's issue is going to be on the defensive end of the floor. That remains a factor for him. It remains something that is currently holding him back from being an NBA player, period, but certainly would hold him back from being a big-time rotation guy, a 25-minute, 30-minute per game type player in the NBA. But offensively, he's just too good to ignore. Averaging 11.5 points, 6 boards, 3 assists in 8 games so far with the Wisconsin Herd. He's shooting 33% from 3. It's not elite, but it's a heck of a lot better than he was in college. He's also shooting 60% from the field, so probably close to 65-ish% on 2-pointers. Fantastic to see Drew continuing to succeed, having these kind of big breakout games in the G League. Hopefully, it will lead into some opportunity in the NBA in the not-too-distant future, ideally this season at some point. Drew's not the only former Gonzaga player doing well in the G League this season. Malachi Smith has been fantastic for the Rip City Remix in their inaugural season. The G League affiliate of the Portland Trailblazers playing their home games at the Chiles Center at the University of Portland's campus. Malachi is averaging 16 points, 6.8 boards, 4.2 assists, and 1.5 steals in 10 games for the Remix. He's shooting only 40% from the field, only 30% from deep, but still 16 points per game in the G League for Rip City. Fantastic to see that. He did get passed over for an opportunity to join the NBA roster. The Blazers were desperate for a guard. They had some injuries. Anthony Simons has been out until very recently for the entire year. Scoot Henderson was out. Malcolm Brogdon was out. The team desperately needed guards. Instead of calling up Smith from the G League, they signed another WCC alumni in Jamari Bouye. Bouye only played about, I think, 6 or 7 games with Portland before he ended up getting cut when Brogdon and Henderson returned from their injuries. I was a little sad that Malachi did not get that opportunity, although Portland desperately needed a point guard, and Malachi is definitely more of a combo guard, off the ball guard. But still, the performance we've seen from him in the G League merits consideration for the NBA, and hopefully both Timmy and Malachi get that chance in the near future. Also want to shout out Admon Gilder playing for the G League Ignite, one of 3 Zags, along with Jeremy Pargo and David Stockton, who is playing with that Ignite team. Again, the Ignite is effectively formed in order to give 3 or 4 NBA draft prospects a chance to really shine. Ron Holland is among them. Matas Buzelis is among them. Tyler Smith is among them. 3 fantastic NBA draft prospects. And the G League Ignite have had a very bad season, but Admon Gilder has been a really nice piece for them. 12.2 points, 6 boards, 2.5 assists, and 2.2 steals in 10 games for the Ignite. He's shooting 46.5% from 3. Again, the NBA scouts aren't exactly looking at Admon Gilder there just because of his age, his size. He's not really an NBA prospect, but for him to go out and perform extremely well. He had 22 points in a recent game for the Ignite. For him to be performing on this stage at this level against this competition with these kind of teammates is a really good showcase of how talented he is. And Gonzaga fans never really got to see him at full strength. He had that wrist injury early in that season, but really nice to see him performing well. Mentioned Stockton and Pargo. They've both played a small role for the Ignite this year. Stockton started 3 games and frankly just wasn't very good. I think his plus minus was like -22. He really struggled early in the season for the Ignite. They replaced him. They signed Norris Cole. They also replaced him a bit with Pargo. Pargo's been better, 12.3 points, 7.8 assists in his 4 games, but neither of those guys have really been the answer for this Ignite team at point guard, and Gilder's been the one who has pretty clearly outplayed them this season for the G League Ignite. Closing out the show with Marco Gonzalez. First time we've talked about baseball in a while here on Locked On Zags, but Marco, a longtime Gonzaga alumni, longtime Seattle Mariners starting pitcher, got traded this offseason alongside Jared Kelenic and Evan White from the Seattle Mariners to the Atlanta Braves. In a cost-cutting move by Seattle. I know many of you are Mariners fans, and you are probably fairly frustrated about the direction of the team right now. I cannot say that I blame you. It's very sad to see Marco go, but I was excited for him to get a chance to play in Atlanta, a team that has legitimate championship aspirations. I thought, man, Marco's probably going to win a ring with the Braves, and if nothing else, we can celebrate that. Unfortunately, Atlanta flipped him almost immediately to the Pittsburgh Pirates, kind of a from first to worst type of scenario here. The Braves are one of the best teams in all of baseball. The Pirates are not. They are one of the worst teams in the league. They need Marco more than Atlanta does, so he should get more of an opportunity. I'm excited for Marco to get a chance to pitch. I'm happy for him in the sense that this is maybe a more likely spot for him to get significant innings. But I am sad that this young man who's connected to the Pacific Northwest, he's got a wife, he's got a young kid. They all live in Seattle. They've been a huge part of the Seattle community, charity work. Marco himself is from Colorado. I believe his wife is from the Seattle area. I know she went to Gonzaga. I'm not 100% sure where she's from, but I doubt it's Pittsburgh. And now they have to relocate their young family to Pittsburgh. It's part of the game. I'm not going to, it's part of the deal. I don't think you should be overly sympathetic in this situation. Again, it's just kind of how it works in professional sports. But as somebody who's been a longtime supporter of Marco, a fan of Marco's, and a fan of the Seattle Mariners, it was kind of sad to see that break happen here this offseason. Marco, for his career in the Seattle Mariners uniform, 61 wins, 47 losses, ERA of 4.08, a whip of 1.27, 631 strikeouts. Sad to see him leave the Pacific Northwest, but wish him all of the best and hope he has a fantastic Renaissance career, a Renaissance season at least, with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 2024. That's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back on Friday with a preview of the University of Washington Huskies, who they are, what kind of team they are, what defense they run. Spoiler alert, they're still running that zone defense. We'll talk about that and what the keys are to a Gonzaga victory on Saturday inside Alaska Airlines Arena. All coming up on Friday's episode of Locked On Zags. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.